Scarcity Brain Loop: Why More Money Won't Fix a Poor Mindset. Written by Ronnie Rowland. Published by Growth Literacy Lounge. Some problems don't go away with success, they grow with it. Money, status, and opportunity are often seen as solutions, but more of anything can quietly amplify the mindset behind it. If that mindset is rooted in fear, lack, or urgency, then no amount of external gain will bring peace. The result is a pattern that's hard to detect but easy to repeat: more money, same stress. New job, same anxiety. Bigger life, smaller sense of ease. This book is not about how to make more. It's about what happens after more doesn't work. The scarcity brain loop isn't driven by income level or net worth. It's powered by a belief system, often inherited, sometimes unconscious, that says there's never enough, not enough time, not enough safety, not enough certainty. People trapped in this loop aren't lazy or irrational. In most cases, they're doing everything right, working harder, saving more, planning better. Yet the tension remains, because the root issue isn't external. It's internal. The chapters ahead are built on one idea: mindset drives behavior more than knowledge does. Behavior, in turn, drives results. And results, without the right mindset, simply feed the same old patterns. Breaking the loop isn't about becoming someone else. It's about understanding the invisible rules already in place, and choosing which ones to keep. True wealth has little to do with accumulation and everything to do with clarity. When clarity becomes the lens, everything changes, not immediately, but permanently. Not by force, but by design. That's what this book is here to explore. Chapter 1: The Loop You Can't See. There are people who double their income yet feel twice as anxious. Others win the lottery and file for bankruptcy within a decade. Some rise from humble beginnings, only to recreate the same financial chaos with more zeros. These stories aren't rare, they're patterns. What looks like misfortune or poor decision-making is often the result of something more subtle, a cognitive loop that runs silently in the background, directing every financial choice like a script memorized in childhood. This loop is not about money. It is about perception. And perception, once set, becomes reality. A scarcity loop begins with a belief: there isn't enough. Not enough money, not enough time, not enough certainty. It roots itself in moments of lack, real or perceived, and reinforces itself by demanding immediate solutions. But solutions sought from within the scarcity loop are never about long-term change. They are about short-term relief. The result is a cycle of urgent decisions made to escape discomfort, which in turn sustains the very discomfort being escaped. A person may save obsessively, but not from vision, from fear. Another might spend compulsively, but not from joy, from anxiety. Both are strategies of scarcity, disguised as financial planning. They are responses to a loop that whispers, if I just had more, I'd feel safe. Yet the arrival of more changes nothing if the loop is still active. The anxiety that once circled an empty fridge now circles an investment portfolio. The urgency that once surrounded a rent payment now surrounds an equity deal. Different context, same pattern. The loop doesn't require poverty to function. It only needs a belief in insufficiency. That belief can exist in any income bracket. It is entirely possible to be wealthy and still feel broke, just as it's possible to have little and feel content. What separates the two is not a number, it is narrative. Narratives are powerful because they shape the interpretation of experience. A scarcity narrative turns every financial moment into a threat or a test. A bill becomes a warning. A delay becomes a disaster. A gain becomes a fleeting fluke. From within the loop, nothing is stable. And when nothing feels stable, everything feels urgent. Urgency is the fuel of the loop. It demands attention. It amplifies emotion. It distorts time. In a state of scarcity, a person might trade a long-term investment for a moment of reassurance. Or turn down an opportunity because the risk feels too large to tolerate. These aren't irrational decisions, they are survival decisions. The loop doesn't optimize for growth. It optimizes for control. Control, in this context, is rarely about outcomes. It's about emotional relief. People stuck in the loop don't want to be rich as much as they want to stop feeling poor. The tragedy is that no amount of wealth guarantees that outcome. Because what's being managed isn't just money, it's uncertainty, identity, and fear. Breaking the loop requires a different orientation. Not a new job, or a financial windfall, or another course on investing. It requires a shift in what is being chased. So long as certainty is the target, the chase never ends. But when contentment becomes the goal, the loop begins to dissolve. This isn't a moral argument. It's not about humility or simplicity. It's about clarity. A mind caught in scarcity cannot see clearly. It reacts. It defends. It retreats. A mind free from the loop responds. It assesses. It adapts. It creates. The scarcity loop is not a flaw. It's a survival adaptation. But survival is a poor substitute for freedom. And freedom, real freedom, begins when the loop is seen not as truth, but as habit. Chapter 2: Scarcity isn't about lack. Scarcity is often misunderstood as a material condition. It's measured by empty shelves, small paychecks, or unpaid bills. But scarcity, in its most powerful form, is not a matter of having too little, it's the persistent belief that there will never be enough. It begins in the mind, not the bank account. People have lived through times of genuine hardship, yet emerged resilient and generous. Others, surrounded by abundance, feel constantly on edge, hoarding time, money, and attention as if a silent threat waits around the corner. This contrast reveals a deeper truth. Scarcity is less about what is possessed and more about how what is possessed is perceived. Perception has the ability to turn a feast into famine. When a person sees the world through the lens of lack, every opportunity looks like a trap and every success feels temporary. Even gains are quickly reframed as potential losses. The mind, shaped by scarcity, interprets progress as a fragile accident rather than a sustainable step forward. In this way, fear overshadows logic. The roots of scarcity often stretch back to early experiences, moments when resources were uncertain, when needs went unmet, or when safety felt out of reach. Over time, these memories harden into mental models, systems of thinking that dictate how money, status, and security are understood. These models are rarely examined, because they feel like common sense. But common sense, in this case, is shaped by unresolved fear. Scarcity thrives in environments where self-worth is tied to achievement. If identity is measured by productivity, then rest becomes guilt. If success is measured by accumulation, then enough is never reached. The finish line moves farther with every milestone. The cycle accelerates, but the destination remains out of reach. What began as ambition quietly turns into exhaustion. The challenge is that scarcity doesn't always look like struggle. Sometimes, it looks like overworking. Sometimes, it looks like obsessive saving. Sometimes, it hides behind the mask of success. The behavior isn't what defines scarcity, the motivation behind the behavior does. Two people can earn the same income or follow the same budget, yet only one feels safe. The difference lies in what they believe that money means. A scarcity-driven mindset tends to interpret risk as loss rather than possibility. Decisions become defensive rather than strategic. Instead of aiming to grow, the aim is to preserve. Instead of imagining what could be gained, the focus shifts to what might be taken away. In such a mental environment, creativity shrinks. Patience evaporates. Long-term thinking becomes nearly impossible, because the present always feels like it's under siege. This mindset leads to a distorted view of time. The future becomes something to be feared or managed obsessively. The past becomes a warning, not a lesson. And the present becomes a transaction, a cost to be endured in hopes of one day feeling safe. Ironically, the belief that there isn't enough often prevents the person from seeing what is already available. Shifting out of scarcity does not require more money. It requires a new internal framework. A person who sees the world as full of options behaves differently than one who sees only threats. They take thoughtful risks. They give generously. They stop measuring life by what is missing and start noticing what is present. This shift is subtle, but transformative. When scarcity loses its grip, Decisions are no longer driven by fear. Time expands. Options multiply. Peace becomes possible, not because the world changed, but because the story about the world did. Scarcity, when left unexamined, becomes a lens that distorts every experience. But when exposed, it becomes a relic of a former mindset, something to understand, not obey. And from that understanding comes the foundation of true wealth, clarity, confidence, and choice. Chapter 3: More is never enough. There is a strange irony in the pursuit of wealth. The more people acquire, the more acutely they feel what they lack. This is not due to greed or moral failure, it is the consequence of a system designed to escalate expectations faster than results. The finish line keeps moving, not because the goals weren't reached, but because the definition of success changes with every step forward. Desire has a compounding effect. What once seemed like luxury quickly becomes baseline. A salary that once felt life-changing becomes the new minimum. A home that once inspired pride eventually feels outdated. The shift is subtle, almost invisible, until contentment is no longer tied to progress but to comparison. The bar doesn't stay fixed, it rises with the people around it. Modern life accelerates this phenomenon. Visibility into the lives of others is unprecedented. Every scroll, post, and headline introduces a new standard. A vacation becomes a lifestyle. A purchase becomes an identity. The comparison game never announces itself directly, but it quietly becomes the framework through which self-worth is measured. The danger isn't in ambition. Ambition, when rooted in purpose, builds civilizations. The danger lies in tethering satisfaction to outcomes that can always be outdone. When self-worth is attached to more, peace becomes conditional. It depends on outperforming, on reaching, on proving. And because there is always someone with more income, more followers, more recognition, the cycle never ends. This cycle doesn't discriminate by net worth. A person with millions can feel as financially insecure as someone with none if their reference point has shifted. When progress is measured by external benchmarks, internal stability weakens. The numbers grow, but so does the anxiety. Psychology calls this hedonic adaptation. Emotionally, humans adjust to new circumstances faster than expected. The excitement of an upgrade fades quickly. The joy of a new level of success becomes background noise within weeks. What once lit a fire now barely flickers. So the chase continues, not for survival, but for stimulation. This creates a dangerous illusion that the next milestone will deliver what the last one didn't. That peace, finally, is just one promotion, one investment, one sale away. Yet, when the milestone is reached, the relief is brief. A new goal replaces it. The target keeps moving. And the mind, trained to focus forward, misses the moment it's in. The deeper cost is not financial, it's emotional. Rest becomes difficult when the loop is active. Trusting that what's been built is enough becomes rare. Instead of enjoying the rewards of effort, the focus shifts to what hasn't been achieved. Instead of security, success breeds fragility, because it feels easily lost. Satisfaction doesn't scale automatically with success. It requires a separate skill, the ability to declare enough. That declaration isn't a rejection of growth, but a rejection of dependence on growth for validation. It is the difference between using wealth and being used by it. Some of the most financially free people are not those with the largest incomes, but those with the clearest values. They understand what matters and what doesn't. They spend in alignment with meaning, not comparison. They set goals that serve their lives, not goals that demand their lives in return. In a system wired for more, choosing enough is radical. It requires awareness. It requires the courage to exit the race. Not because the race is bad, but because the destination was never where fulfillment lived. More is a powerful engine. It can build empires. But it can also erode joy if left unmanaged. Recognizing its limits is the first step in reclaiming freedom from its grip. Because the real wealth lies not in the chase, but in the clarity to know when the chase is over. Chapter 4: Money mirrors your mindset. Money often gets credit for transformation. A higher income, a better job, a larger investment return, all are framed as breakthroughs. But rarely does the number in an account lead to meaningful change if the beliefs behind it remain the same. Money doesn't erase mindset. It reflects it. A person operating from fear will carry that fear into every financial level. At a lower income, the fear may center on survival. At a higher income, the fear shifts to loss. The anxiety evolves, but it doesn't disappear. The internal script remains: something bad could happen, and there may not be enough to handle it. So decisions stay rooted in protection, not possibility. Likewise, someone with a deep sense of inadequacy will use money not to express freedom, but to seek approval. Purchases become performances. Investments become ego projections. Even generosity can turn into strategy, an attempt to buy admiration or mask insecurity. The problem isn't money's presence. It's that money becomes a tool for confirming the beliefs already held, whether true or not. Behavior follows belief. Two people can inherit the same amount, but interpret it in opposite ways. One sees it as an opportunity and moves with calm intention. The other sees it as a burden or a test and reacts with tension. The external situation is identical. The outcomes diverge based on mindset. This is why financial education, while valuable, often fails to create change on its own. Information doesn't override identity. A person may know exactly what to do, yet still sabotage the process. Not because of ignorance, but because of unresolved internal narratives, stories inherited from parents, experiences, or society. These stories shape the emotional relationship with money long before a budget or spreadsheet ever enters the picture. Early environments play a critical role. A child who watches arguments about bills may absorb the message that money equals conflict. Another may grow up in scarcity and internalize the idea that there is never enough to go around. Others may experience sudden wealth and come to believe that money disappears as quickly as it arrives. These impressions form quietly, and they often remain unchallenged for decades. Over time, those impressions become lenses. Through them, every financial choice is filtered. Even abundance can feel unsafe when the lens is colored by fear. Even success can feel hollow when the lens is shaped by comparison. No amount of external change can correct an internal distortion unless that distortion is seen for what it is, a belief, not a fact. Mindset shapes not just behavior, but perception. Two people can encounter the same risk. One sees an opportunity, the other sees a threat. One takes action, the other retreats. One grows, the other protects. It's not the environment that defines the decision. It's the interpretation of that environment. Money amplifies what already exists. It gives more room to express confidence or fear, vision or panic, generosity or control. It doesn't create these traits, it reveals and magnifies them. And because of that, financial progress without mindset awareness often leads to repeated patterns. The problems just become more expensive. Sustainable change begins with clarity. Not about numbers, but about narratives. What does money represent? What does success signal? What does risk feel like? These questions reveal more than a bank statement ever could. Because once the mindset is understood, money begins to take on a different shape. It stops being a mirror of fear and starts becoming a canvas for intention. Money does not fix mindset. It reflects it, exaggerates it, and follows it. Until the internal beliefs change, the external results repeat. And the cycle continues, not due to lack of resources, but because the mirror was mistaken for the solution. Chapter 5: The High Cost of Comparison. The value of anything changes the moment it is compared to something else. What once felt like abundance begins to feel inadequate when placed beside a more polished version. A raise that once brought satisfaction starts to look insufficient when someone else earns more. A home that once inspired pride begins to feel small when viewed next to a newer one. This quiet force, comparison, reshapes perception more than facts ever do. Comparison is not always loud. It doesn't announce itself as envy. It arrives as a subtle shift in expectations. A person can go from gratitude to discontent in seconds, not because their circumstances changed, but because their reference point did. This is the hidden tax of comparison. It charges a person not in dollars, but in peace. At its core, comparison is a measurement of self-worth disguised as observation. It turns financial progress into a race with no defined finish line. The competition isn't declared, but it is deeply felt. Social media platforms, financial rankings, and casual conversations all serve as scoreboards. But unlike traditional games, there is no referee, no clear rules, and no way to win. The psychological toll is significant. A person can be earning more than ever, saving more than ever, and still feel behind. Why? Because comparison shifts the goalpost. As soon as progress is made, someone else's greater progress becomes the new baseline. This rewiring of standards ensures that satisfaction is always delayed. The bar rises faster than results can deliver. Comparison thrives in environments of visibility. When others' lives are constantly on display, it becomes easier to imagine their reality as complete, effortless, or better. What isn't seen are the trade-offs, the debts, the doubts. Comparison is built on incomplete information. But the brain rarely waits for full context before drawing conclusions. It fills in gaps with assumptions, and assumptions often lead to discontent. This discontent is rarely productive. It doesn't lead to better decisions, only faster ones. Investments are made to keep pace, not because they're aligned with long-term vision. Purchases are justified by status, not by utility. Time is traded for appearances. And energy is consumed by a chase that can't be won. Comparison also distorts risk tolerance. A person may feel pressure to take on risks they wouldn't otherwise consider, just to match what others appear to be doing. It leads to overleveraging, overcommitting, and overlooking personal context. The pursuit shifts from sustainable wealth to perceived relevance. One of the most deceptive aspects of comparison is that it masquerades as motivation. It can fuel ambition, but only briefly. Over time, it erodes confidence and narrows perspective. Success begins to feel like survival. Progress begins to feel like catch-up. And the original purpose behind the pursuit is forgotten. Escaping the trap of comparison doesn't require withdrawing from the world. It requires redefining the scoreboard. When goals are internally set, based on values, purpose, and priorities, comparison loses its leverage. The measure of success shifts from relative standing to personal alignment. And in that shift, autonomy is restored. The cost of comparison isn't always obvious. It shows up in stress, in distraction, in decisions that betray long-term goals. It creates the illusion of scarcity in the midst of abundance. And it turns progress into pressure. Wealth, when defined by internal standards, brings freedom. When defined by external benchmarks, it brings insecurity. The difference lies not in income or assets, but in what they're compared to. Knowing this doesn't eliminate comparison, but it changes its influence. Because once the scoreboard is chosen deliberately, the game no longer chooses the player. Chapter 6: The Illusion of Control. The desire for control is a survival instinct. When life feels unpredictable, control offers a sense of stability. In financial behavior, this instinct is amplified. Money becomes not just a resource, but a way to quiet uncertainty. Budgets are over-engineered. Plans are drawn to account for every possible outcome. Risks are avoided, not because they are dangerous, but because they are unknowable. Yet beneath the structure and preparation, there often lies an illusion, the belief that control can eliminate uncertainty. In reality, the future remains indifferent to even the most detailed plans. Economies shift. Markets react. Life intervenes. Still, the pursuit of control continues, driven by a need to protect against fear rather than to move toward possibility. This desire is strongest in those who've known instability. Past financial chaos often breeds a need for absolute structure. What begins as a strategy becomes a coping mechanism. Flexibility is replaced by rigidity. Every dollar must be accounted for, every outcome predicted. But paradoxically, this attempt to control leads to fragility. Systems designed to prevent failure often become brittle in the face of surprise. A scarcity mindset fuels this illusion. When resources once felt scarce, the memory lingers long after conditions improve. A person may save obsessively, delay decisions, or avoid investments, not out of discipline, but from fear of loss. What looks like prudence on the surface is often a way to maintain control in a world that refuses to be controlled. Control can also mask itself as intelligence. Complex spreadsheets, constant monitoring of markets, and daily financial adjustments give the impression of mastery. But complexity is not the same as clarity. Sometimes, the most confident behavior is not knowing everything, it's accepting what can't be known. Financial freedom is often assumed to be about numbers. But the deeper freedom is emotional, the ability to live with uncertainty. Control offers a temporary fix. It provides relief, but rarely peace. Peace comes from understanding the limits of influence and learning to make decisions without guarantees. The healthiest financial systems are not built for precision, they're built for resilience. They allow for errors, setbacks, and change. They are grounded in principles, not predictions. When the illusion of control is removed, what remains is adaptability. And adaptability outlasts accuracy in the long run. There's a difference between preparation and control. Preparation acknowledges uncertainty and builds buffers. Control assumes uncertainty can be eliminated. One invites flexibility, the other demands perfection. One leads to growth, the other to tension. Some of the most effective financial decisions are made by people who understand that control is limited, but response is powerful. These individuals don't try to eliminate risk, they prepare for it. They don't wait for certainty, they act with margins. They don't cling to outcomes, they commit to direction. Letting go of control doesn't mean embracing chaos. It means trading rigidity for responsiveness. It means recognizing that the world moves with complexity, and plans must bend without breaking. Control may provide the illusion of safety, but adaptability delivers the reality of endurance. The goal is not to command every variable, but to become steady in the face of change. When money is no longer used to manage fear, it becomes a tool for possibility. And when control is no longer the priority, clarity rises in its place. That clarity reveals something simple but profound. It was never about controlling the future. It was always about becoming capable of meeting it. Chapter 7: Rich in Time, Poor in Presence. Time is often treated as a secondary currency, measured, traded, and saved with less urgency than money. Yet in practice, time is the scarcer of the two. Money can be earned, invested, multiplied. Time only moves in one direction. And unlike money, time once spent cannot be retrieved. Still, many manage their finances with precision, while spending their time with indifference. Scarcity doesn't only apply to money. It applies to attention. When the mind is consumed with what's missing, it struggles to recognize what's available. Even when time is free, presence can remain absent. A person may sit with family while mentally calculating expenses. They may walk through a park but only see problems left unsolved. The clock ticks, but the moment is lost. Wealth is often defined in numeric terms, yet some of the wealthiest individuals live lives consumed by urgency. Meetings replace meals. Notifications interrupt thoughts. Weekends blur into Mondays. Time becomes structured but not lived. This is the quiet cost of a scarcity-driven life, the erosion of attention. Attention is the gateway to meaning. Without it, even the most beautiful moments are reduced to background noise. The irony is that people often chase financial freedom to gain more time, but then fill that time with more chasing. Freedom becomes a concept, not a practice. Days are spent planning for peace, while peace remains perpetually postponed. Technology accelerates this loop. Tools built to create efficiency often demand more attention. The result is a life constantly connected, rarely present. It is possible to be rich in time and still feel behind. Not because the schedule is full, but because the mind is scattered. Presence requires margin. Margin in thought, in pace, in expectation. It cannot be achieved in a rush or in the shadow of comparison. It must be created deliberately. And that requires a reframing of value, seeing time not just as something to optimize, but something to experience. There's a reason why some people feel more alive during a walk than during a vacation. Presence doesn't wait for the extraordinary. It waits for attention. A mind distracted by scarcity sees time as a means to an end. A mind at peace sees it as the end itself. Financial goals are important. They provide structure and direction. But they must be weighed against the cost of distraction. A person who earns more but lives less is not winning. Time spent worrying is still time spent. The question is whether it was spent in alignment with what matters. Productivity, when driven by fear, becomes a performance. Every task is another attempt to prove worth. Every hour is another metric to justify value. This is not time management, it is identity management. And it rarely leads to peace. Living with intention doesn't require abandoning ambition. It requires choosing where that ambition points. When time is treated as sacred, choices become clearer. Energy is allocated to what matters most. Distractions lose their grip. And life, even in its simplest moments, begins to feel fuller. Scarcity of time is not always about hours. It's about attention. Some of the most time-rich individuals are those who give their full presence to the moment in front of them. They understand that the quality of time matters more than the quantity. And they realize that attention is not just a resource, it's a form of love. Being rich in time means more than having a light schedule. It means having the clarity to show up fully. And that clarity comes not from having more, but from needing less. From choosing depth over speed. From exchanging control for connection. From recognizing that presence, not productivity, is the ultimate measure of a life well lived. Chapter 8: The Paradox of Planning. Planning is seen as a safeguard, an attempt to bring order to chaos. It offers structure, direction, and a sense of control. But beneath its logic lies a paradox. The more rigid the plan, the less prepared one often is for reality. In an unpredictable world, flexibility is a greater asset than precision. People who have experienced financial instability often respond by overcorrecting. Every move becomes calculated, every scenario accounted for. The spreadsheet becomes a source of comfort, the 5-year projection a shield against uncertainty. But overplanning can become its own trap. What begins as strategy morphs into rigidity, and life starts revolving around a script that the world never agreed to follow. The danger in overplanning is subtle. It doesn't show up immediately as failure. It appears as hesitation. Opportunities are delayed because they weren't part of the forecast. Risks are avoided not because they are unwise, but because they are unfamiliar. Planning becomes a way to delay living, until conditions feel perfect, until all outcomes are guaranteed, until fear is neutralized. But no plan can account for everything. Markets shift, health fluctuates, relationships evolve, and desires change. When plans are treated as promises instead of estimates, they create pressure. The goalposts become fixed. Deviations are seen as mistakes rather than adjustments. Instead of adapting, people cling tighter to what was supposed to happen. This approach stems from a mindset of protection. If life once felt out of control, structure becomes a way to regain power. But there is a difference between thoughtful preparation and emotional insurance. One is based on adaptability, the other on fear. The result of the latter is often paralysis. Movement is stalled because every step must be justified by a plan that can't guarantee the future. Risk is not eliminated through planning. It is only disguised. In fact, the belief that everything can be predicted often increases exposure to risk, because flexibility is sacrificed. The best decisions are rarely made by those who waited until all uncertainty disappeared. They are made by those who acted with margins and adjusted as new information emerged. Plans are useful. They provide clarity and alignment. But they should be seen as tools, not contracts. The most resilient individuals are those who know when to let go of the plan and lean into the moment. They make room for surprise. They recognize that detours are not failures, they are inevitable features of the path. There is also an emotional cost to overplanning. The mind becomes future-focused, always calculating, always evaluating. Presence fades. Joy becomes conditional, reserved for the day the plan finally delivers its promise. But that day often moves further away with each step forward. Life becomes a rehearsal for a moment that never arrives. Living fully requires a shift from outcome obsession to value alignment. Plans built around core values can flex with circumstances, because the destination isn't fixed, it's guided. Progress is measured by integrity, not milestones. And success becomes less about execution and more about engagement. The paradox of planning is that those who plan to avoid risk often miss the richest parts of life: spontaneity, growth, discovery. These experiences are not accidents, they are the results of saying yes before certainty arrives. They belong to those who make peace with not knowing and trust themselves to adjust along the way. The most important parts of a plan are not the numbers, but the assumptions. When those assumptions change, and they will, the willingness to adapt matters more than the accuracy of the original design. Because in the long run, the plan is rarely followed exactly. But the mindset behind it will shape every decision. A plan is only as strong as the flexibility built into it. The goal isn't to control the future, but to meet it prepared and open. That balance, between structure and surrender, is where the real power of planning lives. Chapter 9: Growth happens in enough. The pursuit of more is often framed as progress. More money, more recognition, more opportunities, each milestone celebrated as a sign of growth. But growth, in its most meaningful form, often begins when the pursuit of more is replaced with an understanding of enough. Enough is not a stopping point, it is a shift in perspective. It is the moment when growth becomes internal, not external. Enough is difficult to define because it is deeply personal. What feels sufficient to one person may feel like lack to another. This is why chasing external benchmarks leads to dissatisfaction. The bar keeps moving. As soon as one goal is reached, another appears. What once seemed like a dream quickly becomes the new baseline. Satisfaction is deferred. Arrival is delayed. Progress becomes a treadmill instead of a destination. The problem is not ambition. Ambition creates momentum. But when ambition is fueled by inadequacy, it becomes unsustainable. It demands more without offering fulfillment. It mistakes motion for meaning. In this way, growth that begins from scarcity rarely leads to peace. It produces more output, but not more clarity. More achievement, but not more stability. Enough breaks this cycle. It introduces boundaries, not to limit possibility, but to define purpose. It asks a simple but powerful question: what is this all for? When that question is answered clearly, decisions become sharper. Trade-offs become easier. Time is no longer spent chasing validation, but aligning with values. There is a quiet strength in knowing what is sufficient. It allows for generosity, patience, and presence. A person who understands enough doesn't need to prove anything. They are not indifferent to growth. They are simply not enslaved by it. Their goals serve their life, not the other way around. The challenge is that society rarely rewards sufficiency. It rewards visibility. It rewards expansion. It rewards scale. The person who quietly builds a stable, content life without excess is often invisible in a culture obsessed with more. But visibility and value are not the same. Some of the most successful lives are built away from applause. Enough creates resilience. A person who needs less is harder to manipulate, harder to scare, and harder to distract. They are more likely to take thoughtful risks because their decisions are not driven by desperation. They are able to walk away from bad deals, toxic environments, and unnecessary noise. They move through life with a different kind of power, the power of clarity. Understanding enough also reduces regret. Many financial mistakes are made not from ignorance, but from dissatisfaction. People overextend, overleverage, and overwork not because they must, but because they believe they should be further ahead. The belief that success is always out there leads to reckless urgency. But when enough is defined, urgency loses its grip. Patience becomes possible. This shift isn't about settling. It's about anchoring. Anchoring in values, in purpose, in what matters beyond numbers. Growth still happens, but it's measured differently. It's measured in peace of mind, in stronger relationships, in deeper experiences. Growth becomes a matter of depth, not just height. There will always be someone with more. More income, more influence, more acclaim. But once enough is reached, those comparisons lose power. They no longer shape identity. They no longer dictate self-worth. Enough creates a foundation that external circumstances can't shake. The irony is that those who understand enough are often the ones who end up with more freedom, more time, more meaningful wealth. Because they stopped chasing and started choosing. Growth, real growth, begins at the point where fear ends and clarity begins. And that point is called enough. Chapter 10. Scarcity can't be outsourced. There is a quiet myth embedded in modern thinking that a better life is just one external change away. A raise will solve anxiety. A new relationship will bring peace. A coach, a book, a system, each positioned as the key to unlocking contentment. But when scarcity is rooted in mindset, no external upgrade can resolve the internal deficit. The result is a pattern where solutions are pursued endlessly, but the discomfort remains. This is why some people continue to feel financially insecure, even after doubling or tripling their income. Why others, surrounded by support and opportunity, still feel alone or behind. The source of their tension is not their circumstances, it's their relationship to those circumstances. The mind, once trained to see through the lens of lack, will find scarcity everywhere, regardless of how much is gained. Outsourcing the scarcity problem is appealing because it avoids introspection. It is easier to change a job than to change a belief. Easier to follow someone else's blueprint than to question long-held assumptions. But until those assumptions are addressed, behavior tends to follow the same loop: acquire, hope for relief, feel let down, repeat. Progress is made on paper, but not in peace. External solutions are not useless. A good financial plan, mentor, or environment can make a difference. But these tools work best when paired with internal alignment. Without that, they become masks. A new role hides the same fears. A new investment strategy disguises the same impulse. The vehicle changes, but the driver stays the same. Much of this stems from the way scarcity rewires the emotional system. It conditions the brain to expect instability. Even when things are going well, the nervous system scans for what might go wrong. This hypervigilance isn't a sign of realism, it's a habit formed in survival. It produces overreaction to small setbacks and underappreciation for quiet wins. No matter the external improvement, the internal story remains stuck in the same past. Until that story is rewritten, the cycle continues. More money doesn't ease the fear of loss. More connection doesn't dissolve the fear of rejection. The internal dialogue remains. It's not enough. I'm not safe. Something is missing. These messages are subtle, often invisible, but they shape every decision, reaction, and expectation. Freedom begins with recognition. Not of what's missing, but of what's running in the background. The script. The pattern. The instinct to reach outward instead of looking inward. When that pattern is named, it starts to lose its hold. From there, a different kind of work begins, less glamorous, less immediate, but more enduring. This work doesn't involve radical change. It involves curiosity. Why does discomfort spike after success? Why does progress trigger guilt or fear? Why does rest feel unsafe? These questions reveal the architecture of a scarcity-driven mindset. And once the architecture is visible, it can be rebuilt, slowly, thoughtfully, and with far fewer assumptions. The result is not perfection. It's a different kind of clarity. One that allows external tools to serve, rather than define. One that no longer waits for someone or something to deliver peace. Because peace is not delivered. It is created from within, when the loop of scarcity is interrupted at its source. No one else can do this work. Not because others aren't skilled, but because scarcity is an internal experience. The best guidance can point the way, but the shift must come from within. Otherwise, the most promising opportunities will feel like threats. The best moments will be filtered through fear. And the chase will never end. Scarcity cannot be fixed by what's acquired. It can only be resolved by how things are perceived. Until that shift occurs, the loop continues, new scenery, same story. But once it does, freedom is no longer a future reward. It becomes a present reality. Chapter 11: Building the Abundance Operating System. An operating system determines how a machine processes information. In the same way, a person's internal framework, the beliefs, defaults, and assumptions they carry, shapes how they interpret events, make decisions, and experience money. When that system is built on scarcity, even abundance feels like a temporary illusion. But when the internal framework is grounded in abundance, even modest resources can feel sufficient, even expansive. Scarcity is not simply about lack, it is about narrative. It's the story the mind tells about what's possible, what's enough, and what's safe. If that story is shaped by fear, the system becomes reactive. Every opportunity is filtered through doubt. Every setback is magnified. Even progress is treated with suspicion, as if it might slip away at any moment. To escape that cycle, the system must be rebuilt, not patched or tweaked, but rewritten from its foundation. That begins with awareness. A person cannot change what they cannot see. Naming the patterns, urgency, comparison, hypervigilance, overcontrol, is the first step in disarming them. Once they are named, they can be examined, questioned, and eventually replaced. Replacing a scarcity-driven operating system requires adopting principles that can hold up under stress. The first is sufficiency. Not as a ceiling, but as a foundation. It's the belief that enough is not a compromise, it's clarity. From sufficiency comes a more balanced perspective on risk, time, and reward. Choices become more deliberate. Pressure softens. The second principle is margin. Just as a financial margin protects against unexpected expenses, an emotional margin protects against burnout and impulsive decisions. It creates space to pause, reflect, and respond rather than react. A life designed with margin is more adaptable, less fragile. It can bend without breaking. Another critical upgrade is identity separation. In a scarcity loop, self-worth becomes fused with financial outcomes. Wins are seen as validation. Losses are interpreted as personal failure. But when identity is separated from money, decisions become cleaner. Risk tolerance improves. Setbacks become data, not definitions. Attention is the currency of the new system. In a scarcity mindset, attention is consumed by what's missing. In an abundance mindset, attention is directed toward what is available, what is working, and what can be created. That shift in focus changes not only perception, but behavior. Scarcity fuels reactivity. Abundance fosters creativity. Gratitude is not a motivational slogan, it is a strategy. It grounds the mind in the present and protects it from endless comparison. It redirects the focus from gaps to gains. It doesn't eliminate ambition, it calibrates it. Ambition fueled by gratitude builds. Ambition fueled by fear hoards. Simplicity also plays a role. Complexity is often used to signal control, but it usually signals confusion. The most effective systems are often the simplest. A clear understanding of values, goals, and limits creates a filter through which better decisions emerge. Simplicity doesn't limit growth, it sharpens it. Building an abundance operating system does not guarantee external success. But it does change the internal experience of success and failure. It produces steadiness. It allows for longer-term thinking. It creates space for generosity, rest, and reinvention. The real transformation happens when abundance becomes the default, not the exception. When stress no longer hijacks every decision. When enough becomes a place to build from, not escape from. That's when money stops being a mirror of fear and starts becoming an expression of clarity. Systems shape lives. They operate quietly in the background, but they determine what is seen, what is ignored, and what is believed. Changing the system is hard work, but it is the only kind of work that leads to lasting peace. Not because the world becomes more predictable, but because the mind finally does. Take care and be well.